Well, howdy there, stranger. I'm Jordy.
And I'm Brad.
And welcome back to Beers with Queers, the true crime podcast where I research a case and Brad here, and potentially you guys.
Don't know a damn thing about it.
So this week's case is going to be a rough one, just putting that out there. And it's actually probably the most recent case that we've covered so far on this podcast. So this tragic crime occurred last year towards the beginning of 2023. And despite the horrific details and motivations behind it, it's not been getting talked about a lot. We are going to be discussing the tragic and senseless murder of Brianna Ghey, a 16-year-old trans girl from England whose life was cut short by people she thought were her friends. Now, of course, trigger warning, this case will be discussing topics of transphobia, hate crimes towards trans people, and details in relation to a trans person being murdered. So, if that's too triggering for you guys, or if that's not your cup of tea, totally understand if you have to skip the episode, and we shall see you back next week. But this is a very sad, tragic, but very important case to tell and remember. So this is one of those cases where the motivation and reasoning behind the murder is so horrifying and bizarre, it's kind of hard to comprehend it. Because although transphobia is a part of the reason and motivation for Brianna's murder, another motivation is the misfortune of her befriending someone whose ultimate goal in life was to become a serial killer, and someone who wanted to know what it felt like to murder another human being. So those are the absolutely most terrifying people, because there's really no way to tell that this teenage girl had in her head that she wanted to be a serial killer when she grew up.
And it seems to start that way. It seems to start young. You know, there's a lot of the serial killers that are like, I want to know what it feels like to kill somebody, and they think that years before they ever do it.
So if I had to compare this case to any other one to give you guys an idea of kind of what's in store, I would say this is very similar to the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddard. So she was a young girl murdered back in 2006 by two boys that she thought were her friends, but behind her back, they were literally plotting out the details of her murder. So I know you've heard this one, Brad, because we've listened to a few podcasts.
This is the Scream Killers?
Yeah, this is the Scream Killers. So these two boys were fascinated by the movie Scream, and they wanted to carry out their own killing spree. So they literally documented on video before and after, and they're planning of brutally murdering this teenage girl who was their friend. And so they completely, betrayed her, blindsided her, and their whole motivation was they just wanted to see what it felt like.
Yeah, they come over to her house and watch Kill Bill with her so that they could leave one of her doors unlocked so they could sneak back in.
Yeah, that was a horrifying case.
And not only that, they didn't just come in and kill her. They kind of terrorized her before. They would flip the lights on and off and make her get scared and everything, and then kill her. And these were her friends.
Yeah, so kind of like the Cassie Jo Stoddard case, Brianna Ghey's case is also similar in that her killers did start out as her really good friend, and ultimately behind her back for months, her friend was plotting her murder and even attempted to murder her on one previous occasion. So now that you guys know what's in store, let's just jump right into it. It's the evening of February 11th, 2023 in Colchester, England, and a couple named Catherine and Andrew Vaz were walking their dog through Colchester Linear Park just after 3 p.m. Now, as the two walked down a secluded path through the woods, a short distance up ahead, they saw a small open area with a set of stairs leading down to another trail on their left and a park bench on their right. Now, standing in the middle of the pathway by the bench were two young teenagers crouched down over what initially appeared to be a dead animal. The two teens, one boy and one girl, noticed the couple approaching and quickly darted off down another trail into the woods. Now, as the couple grew closer, they realized to their horror that the object the two strangers had been crouched over was in fact the bloody and mutilated body of a young girl. Now, the girl was lying face down in the dirt and unresponsive, but it was clear she suffered a violent attack as there were multiple stab wounds all over her back. Catherine quickly called 999, which of course is England's version of 911, and begged for paramedics to come immediately. Now, although it's never been released, Catherine's frantic 911 call was later played in court, and transcripts of the call were released to the public. During the call, Catherine can be heard begging for help as she can't tell whether the girl is alive or dead due to how badly she was attacked. Blood completely covered her face, soaked her shirt and legs, and her body was riddled with large knife wounds. Catherine ended her call by crying and stating, "I don't think there's anything you can do for her. Oh my God." Police and paramedics arrived 3 minutes after the call at 3:16 p.m. and were directed down the path by Andrew where they found the young girl. Now, to everyone's shock, despite how horrifically she had been attacked, the girl was still alive but barely clinging to life. Paramedics had no time to load her into an ambulance and began attempting to save her life right there on the ground as she went into cardiac arrest. Sadly, despite their best efforts, the girl would pass away from her injuries right there in the park at 4:02 p.m. Of course, following this, police immediately taped off the park and they began a murder investigation as the girl's body was taken in for an immediate autopsy. An autopsy found that this had been a horrific and brutal attack. The girl had been stabbed a total of 28 times, all over her neck, back, chest, and head. She had deep defensive wounds all over her hands and arms, showing that she fought back hard against her attacker, or attackers, and prosecutors would go on to say that her death was, quote, extremely brutal and punishing, as she had slowly bled to death in the dirt. The victim was also quickly identified as being 16-year-old Brianna Ghey, a Year 11 student from Cheshire, England, and her family was quickly notified as news of the horrific attack began to spread all over the area. Immediately, investigators knew that the most likely suspects in Brianna's murder were the two teenagers Catherine and Andy saw running away from her body, and so they quickly put out a statement asking anyone to come forward with any leads. Within literal hours of Brianna's murder and asking the public for help, police were flooded with multiple tips from eyewitnesses naming the two teenagers seen with Brianna in the hours before her murder. The two were identified as 15-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson and 15-year-old Eddie Ratcliffe, and by the day after the murder, on February 12th, both were arrested in their respective homes in Cheshire on suspicion of first-degree murder, and both were taken down to the station for questioning. So, what would be said would leave police baffled, shocked, and speechless over how two literal children could be such monsters. So, now that we've kind of set the scene, before we get too into it, let's go back to the beginning and figure out how we got here. So let's start with the most important person in this case, and that is, of course, Brianna Ghey. So Brianna was born on November 7th, 2006 to Esther Ghey and Peter Spooner in the town of Warrington in Cheshire, England. Brianna was assigned male at birth, but starting at the age of 14, she began to openly identify as a girl, began to dress more feminine and grow her hair out, and officially changed her name to Brianna and came out as transgender by the age of 15.
It's very brave.
Very brave, and that's something you'll see here in a minute, is she was a true inspiration to a lot of people, especially older people, just from the fact that she was so brave to come out so young. And on top of that, the best part about that was that she was immediately accepted by her mother, father, and stepfather. Her father would actually release a statement after his daughter's death in which he stated, "At first it was hard to be the father of a child who is transgender. I spent time grieving the son that I lost, but eventually that gave way to the thrill of gaining another beautiful daughter." So that is absolutely 100% the best case scenario, especially for people that come out as transgender. And so literally love to see it. Very happy. She had a wonderful home life. And as you'll see here soon, Esther Ghey is a badass woman, amazing mother. So this, of course, like I said, is the best case scenario for anyone queer, but especially trans. Following her coming out, Brianna thrived in living life as her true self, but that didn't mean, of course, she was free from struggles. Not long after coming out as trans, Brianna was diagnosed with ADHD, autism, and an anxiety disorder, which greatly impacted her comfort of living. Her mother would later state that Brianna's autism made it very hard for her to identify potentially dangerous situations or to identify if people had ulterior motives, or on top of that, her anxiety disorder made her terrified to venture out of the house most of the time. So I kind of can relate to that because I actually do have an anxiety disorder myself. Very hard to deal with day-to-day tasks, just as simple as telling the waiter that they got my order wrong. So she really did struggle, but she made the best of it. This also prevented Brianna from attending regular classes at her school, Birchwood Community High School, and instead she required one-on-one tutoring in the school's inclusion building. And of course, another issue was something all queer kids in high school had to face, and that was relentless bullying and harassment and discrimination from their fellow classmates, because remember, kids can be shitheads.
Especially British kids, at least what I've seen in like television and movies.
I was about to say, none of our UK listeners come for us, but message us if that's true or not, because the way the youth in Britain is portrayed in y'all's TV shows, they're really mean. So I don't know if that's just a stereotype or if that's true. One of our UK listeners, please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that like I know for sure, but like everything I've seen in like movies and TV really makes UK schools look very vicious. Of course, that's probably, I'm sure you get the same thing from American schools and stuff over here, especially with our school shootings.
I was literally about to say, I was just thinking, yeah, they're probably like, yeah, maybe our kids are portrayed mean, but y'all's are literal psychopaths.
Yeah.
So, fair. So, Brianna was subjected to the usual bouts of name-calling, teasing, and ridicule that so many queer people had to face on a daily basis. Her mother would later report that she was also physically assaulted on at least 2 separate occasions as part of, quote, gang beatings. So, to help combat the bullying she was facing at school and her mental struggles, Brianna turned to the internet for comfort, and it's here she began to really thrive. Brianna would create a TikTok account and begin posting videos of herself doing dance challenges, makeup tutorials, and talking about her journey as a 16-year-old trans girl. Brianna quickly found a community on the platform and pretty soon began amassing an impressive following, gaining nearly 30,000 followers within a year. Many of her followers were young trans women like herself, and many saw her as an inspiration due to not only how beautiful she looked, because she was also gorgeous, very beautiful, but the fact that she wasn't afraid to live her true, authentic self at such a young age. Multiple trans women would later come forward from all around the world and talk about how Brianna actually helped all them in their own journey of transitioning. They had all reached out to her through TikTok and quickly became close friends as Brianna offered them makeup tips, advice, and just a shoulder to lean on. One friend from Scotland would say, quote, "She made me feel unstoppable as a trans girl, and she made me feel really pretty because she would never let me put myself down." One friend from Germany would state, "Brianna would constantly look out for girls in our group chats. She helped me find ways to access medical care for my transition safely. She always made sure we were in good hands." Another friend she met online would state, "I'd never met someone who started their transition so young. She was so respectful and welcoming to other trans women, not catty at all. She'd help young trans women get access to hormones safely and legally, advising them on the best private doctors, and always congratulating them on every step of their journey. I'm so sad and angry that the sweetest 16-year-old girl, who is a beacon of positivity, is now gone." So all this just really shows you what kind of a person Brianna was, especially the fact that she was 16 and doing all this. You know, most 16-year-olds are literally acting as a guide to an entire community, older people, younger people, and she just wasn't afraid to live her true self and to actively seek out support and help for other people because she knew what they were going through. And I think that's another reason that makes this case all the more sad and tragic, is the fact that such a positive influence on the trans community was taken in such a senseless act of violence.
That's what I was just thinking. I was like, just think of the good that she could have done and continued to do, because she was already doing it. And then some shithead takes it away.
And just wait, because when we say shitheads, these are the ultimate shitheads. So even with all the good she was doing, Brianna still had her own struggles with depression, anxiety, and harassment at school. One of her last videos posted to TikTok was of her talking about how she had been excluded from school activities due to being trans. Esther, Brianna's mother, would later talk about how she often worried about Brianna due to her depression and anxiety. The COVID lockdown had an immense impact on Brianna's mental health and made her even more terrified of venturing out of the house except for school. Brianna also had very few friends that weren't on the internet, and so her mother worried she wasn't getting enough social interaction in real life. That all seemed to change, and things seemed to be looking up for Brianna when she announced to her mother in October of 2022 that she had made a new friend named Scarlett Jenkinson. The two met because Scarlett had recently transferred schools, and was placed in the same one-on-one inclusion classroom with Brianna. The two seemed to hit it off right away and became fast friends, which of course thrilled Brianna's mother. But sadly, little did either of them know, Scarlett was a very, very disturbed teenager, and she was hiding a dark and sinister obsession that Brianna would soon become the fixation of. So now that we know a little bit about Brianna, let's talk a little bit about Scarlett Jenkinson and her soon-to-be accomplice, Eddie Ratcliffe. So Scarlett Jenkinson was born in 2007 to Brian Jenkinson and Emmon Sutton in the area of Colchester and was the couple's youngest child, with Scarlett having 3 older brothers. And it's so wild to think that these people were born in 2007 and they were teenagers. It just makes you realize how fast time flies. Brian worked as a builder and plaster, having previously worked as an engineer, and Emma worked as a design teacher at a local Catholic school. Now, by all accounts from everyone, the Jenkinson family was the picture-perfect family. The parents had great jobs and provided them with a very comfortable living. Both were incredibly loving and attentive to all their children. Neither were known to be abusive or even do physical punishment. And neither Scarlett or anyone else reported anything bad or traumatic ever happening during Scarlett's childhood. There was a 15-year age gap separating Scarlett from her older brothers, and that of course made her the baby of the family, and she became her parents' golden child. Every photo from her childhood shows her happy and smiling as her parents take her to do things such as horseback riding or to church on Sunday. And for the first decade of her life, Scarlett's life was uneventful and easy. So that is another thing that's fascinating about this case is a lot of the times when you have serial killers or people that do commit such brutal crimes, first thing people go is they must have had a shitty or crappy childhood. And Scarlett's case, everyone's like, no, by all accounts, she had the perfect childhood, actually.
Yeah, that's not always the case. Sometimes they're born that way.
Yeah, I was about to say, sometimes I think maybe the evil's just born in them. So Scarlett had it pretty easy, and she seemed to be a really happy child. But that started to change as she turned 11 or 12. At this age, she began to wear more makeup and dress more quote-unquote provocative, and began to act out by regularly using marijuana, and by the time she was 13, she began to use cocaine. So that is a huge jump.
Wow. I wonder what kind of person sells cocaine to a 13-year-old. I guess any drug dealer.
I was about to say, money's money, sadly, for some people. So Scarlett also developed a love for horror films around this time, with her favorite being Child's Play and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, of course, the media would harp on this extensively following the murder, but as we know, multiple studies have shown that there is no correlation between violent horror movies causing people to murder. People already have to have something wrong with them to be influenced by anything. Pretty soon, her favorite film turned out to be Sweeney Todd, and she often posted about it on TikTok, saying things such as, quote, "He kills people with one of the sharpest blades in the world. He cuts their throats really deep. It's so dark and romantic." This obsession with horror movies seemed to have given way to a more concerning and darker obsession for Scarlett, which was an obsession with serial killers. More specifically, killers like Jeffrey Dahmer and Richard Ramirez, a.k.a. the Night Stalker. So
two of the worst.
Two of the absolute worst. And of course, obsession with horror movies. I mean, I was obsessed with horror movies at that age too. Loved them. I guess some people that aren't used to it could see that as concerning. I just see it's art. It's a form of art. But now, at that age, an obsession with serial killers is kind of, I think that's the point to step in. Scarlett would write out detailed biographies of her favorite serial killers in her diary, where she would describe their crimes in graphic detail. This obsession with serial killers would then lead to an obsession with visiting various quote-unquote gore websites, where she would look for videos of people dying or being tortured, murdered, and beheaded, and eventually this led to her downloading software that allowed her to access the dark web in order to watch videos of people being tortured and murdered. So this is a huge escalation. Pretty soon, Scarlett's behavior began to grow increasingly bizarre and terrifying at her school, Colchester High School. There she would openly talk about how she had a kill list of every one of her classmates she wanted to murder. She would constantly come to school high off drugs and would tell everyone that she was a Satanist like the Night Stalker. She attempted to recruit fellow classmates to take part in blood rituals with her, and during one incident used a knife to carve the name of a boy she had a crush on into her own arm.
Yeah, none of that's concerning behavior. I mean,
That's pretty concerning behavior.
you would think like that would be run up the ladder somewhere and somebody would do something about it.
You would think, and I guess it's one of those things, maybe she hit it really well, maybe they trusted her. Who knows, but...
Guess she had to wear long sleeves for a long time.
I was about to say, especially because later on, a parent of a student that went to school with Scarlett would say, like, oh yeah, everyone knew she had a kill list.
And see, that's the thing. It's like, it's like that school shooter that they literally nicknamed him School Shooter, and nobody ever done anything about it or said anything about it. And it's like, when it escalates so far, you would think they would say, hey, this actually is concerning enough that we should do something about it.
Yeah, if I knew one of my fellow classmates had a kill list, I'm reporting them.
And I would also be very nice to that person.
And I would be very nice. I'd be nice to their face. Absolutely. I'd be their bestie. But as soon as I got alone with a teacher, I'd be like, hey, let me talk to you real quick.
We need to talk.
So on top of all that, a video would also later be found on her phone in which she is shown cutting herself with a knife, wiping her blood on it, and then using it to repeatedly stab a couch. All this behavior led to Scarlett being ostracized by her classmates, who found her weird and terrifying, which is actually what she seemed to be going for, so she succeeded admirably in her plan. But fair to the other kids, yeah, I'd find her weird and terrifying too. However, despite her deeply disturbing behavior, Scarlett was able to make one friend that seemed to share her dark fascinations, and that was a 15-year-old named Eddie Ratcliffe. The two had met in school when they were both 11 years old, and although they wouldn't be described as best friends, both interacted on a semi-regular basis for most of their schooling. So Eddie Ratcliffe was also born in 2007 to Kyle Ratcliffe and Alice Hemmings, and like Scarlett, he seemed to have a fairly normal and decent childhood. His father worked as a manager of a truck company and also owned his own fitness gym. His mother worked as a graphic designer, and the family lived in the area of Manchester for most of Eddie's childhood. Now, Eddie was described as a happy child and loved to spend his time training in kickboxing at his father's gym, and he actually got good enough to the point that in 2018, he actually traveled to Jamaica and competed in a competition as an amateur kickboxer. Eddie was also extremely smart and achieved top grades in all of his classes. Neighbors who knew him growing up described him as incredibly smart and soft-spoken, although a bit somewhat socially awkward, which kind of comes with the territory. Eddie would be diagnosed with autism while in school, and this affected his ability to interact with his fellow classmates socially, and of course, it led to him often being bullied, because remember, kids can be shitheads.
But if I was a kickboxing champion, I'd teach them a lesson real quick.
I was about to say, though, they're shitheads, but they're also idiots if they're bullying a kickboxer. Scarlett would become kind of known as Eddie's protector throughout most of their time knowing each other, and she was known to openly threaten anyone who picked on him by stating that she would, quote, stab their grandmother in the neck. As the two got older, they seemed to grow closer as friends, with Eddie being described as Scarlett's shadow or lapdog, as he would constantly follow her around and do anything she asked without question, and he hung on her every word. In return for his loyalty to her, Scarlett would help Eddie talk to girls he liked and protect him from bullies. The two would often spend their free time outside of school watching videos of murder on the dark web together and exchanging hundreds of graphic text messages in which they describe how they wanted to torture and murder their fellow classmates and, quote, look into their eyes as they knew the end was coming. Again, highly disturbing, highly concerning. Sounds like both of them need some sort of therapy.
I can see that kind of stuff being very much easier to hide. That this is between the two of them. And of course, I'm sure it all came out after they got to look at these phones and stuff like that. But again, all the stuff at school and like literally all of the kids being like, we're scared of them.
And again, that's trying to think like, of course we don't know, but maybe Scarlett told her parents that they were just saying that because they were mean to her and they were bullying her. And of course you always want to believe the best in your child. No one wants to believe their child is going around school saying they're a Satanist and trying to recruit other kids for blood rituals. So I can kind of see where it's like that. You're seeing her with rose-tinted glasses, like, this is your child, this is your baby. So maybe more in your head trying to deny anything's wrong with her. But also, who knows? Scarlett also confessed to Eddie that she dreamed of becoming a serial killer and wanted to take trophies from her victims, including pieces of their flesh, so she could eat them later. All this is, of course, disturbing, but it's one thing to talk about and fantasize about committing serious crime, and it's another to act on them. So, yeah, very concerning, but at this point, they're just two really ill teenagers talking about their fantasies, but so far they've not actually hurt anyone.
Except the couch.
Except the couch? But that all changed in September of 2022 when Scarlett would act on her urges. So on September 27th, Scarlett brought a handful of gummy bears to school and persuaded a 13-year-old classmate to eat them, which they did. Little did the 13-year-old know, but Scarlett had laced the gummy bears with cannabis, and taking so many caused the 13-year-old to become seriously ill. Police were called, and Scarlett was interviewed, where she admitted to spiking the gummies. Now, although the police declined to press charges, Scarlett was kicked out of Colchester High School and forced to transfer to a new one in October of 2022, which was, of course, Birchwood Community High School, where she would quickly meet her future victim, Brianna Ghey. Now, like I said earlier, the two met after being placed in the same inclusion classroom at school, and according to Scarlett, the two began interacting after Scarlett commented she liked Brianna's eyeliner. Following this, the two seemed to really hit it off and bonded over their shared feelings of feeling like outcasts. They began spending time after school together and for a time seemed to be genuine friends. During this time, Scarlett and Eddie were also keeping in contact, and their conversations began to turn increasingly dark as all they talked about was all the people they needed to quote-unquote get rid of. Scarlett wanted to kill two boys at her old high school who were apparently making fun of her boyfriend and told Eddie they deserved death. The two had compiled a list of 4 classmates that they wanted to murder and seemed to be actively making plans to do it. But at some point within the first 6 weeks of meeting Brianna, Scarlett told Eddie that she wanted to add her to the list. Scarlett confided in Eddie that she had become obsessed with Brianna and texted him saying, quote, "I'm obsessed with someone I know, but I don't have feelings for them. She's called Brianna, and I don't know how to explain it. Also, she has a dick. LOL." So Scarlett and Eddie would talk about Brianna over the following days, and Scarlett told him about Brianna's struggles with autism, depression, and anxiety, and told him that makes Brianna the most vulnerable and easiest target on their kill list, which is really messed up to think, like, someone who shares similar struggles to you, and you're like, that makes them the perfect victim because they're so vulnerable. Someone that went out of their way to, thought you were their friend, and is like the first genuine friend that you've had, and your first thought is, I want to kill her.
There's something wrong with that person when they look at kindness and say, I see the weakness in you and want to kill you.
And that's the thing. Scarlett and Eddie are monsters, but they are also very, very deeply mentally ill. But that doesn't excuse their behavior. But something's wrong. Really wrong. Now, although this seemed to be Scarlett's main motive for targeting Brianna, Eddie's motive was also made pretty clear in his messages to Scarlett because he was a very outspoken, homophobic, and transphobic person. One of the boys added to the two's kill list was actually added simply because Eddie stated he was a fag. Eddie also referred to Brianna as it in all of his messages about her and told Scarlett that he wanted to, quote, see if Brianna screamed like a man or a woman, and he wanted to see how big her penis was. So over the next few months, the two continued to text back and forth about the best ways to kill their victims, with Eddie believing that poison would probably be the best way to kill Brianna, as that way it would look like a suicide due to Brianna's history of depression. Again, you know she has a history of depression, so your first thought is, well, if she's depressed and people know about it, the best way to kill her is to make it look like a suicide.
This is very calculated.
So calculated, and it's about to get even more calculated. So on January 23rd, 2023, 19 days before Brianna's murder, Scarlett would attempt to kill her unsuccessfully by poisoning her with ibuprofen. She texted Eddie a picture of red pills and said, quote, by the way, do you die from eating ibuprofen gel? I got a plan if you do. To which Eddie responded, it is dangerous, yes. I'm not sure how much would be lethal. Scarlett texted back, you know that girl I mentioned, Brianna? I'm still trying to kill her, and the easiest way is pill overdose. People already know she's depressed and shit, so nobody would get sus. But for some reason, she has a high tolerance. I gave her some today that should have been enough to kill her. Scarlett revealed to him that she and Brianna had gotten high together on several occasions, and during this time, she gave Brianna pills that she said would make her high, but were actually a handful of ibuprofen, and she then mixed a dozen more into a drink to give it to her, causing Brianna to become violently ill. So, also, these two geniuses are plotting these murders, and they're texting each other the entire time, leaving the most detailed digital footprint of their crimes.
Well, I mean, they are kids.
That too. They're kids, so they think they're smarter than they are. So Brianna was poisoned, and she complained of stomach pain and nausea to her mother, Esther, who believed Brianna may have appendicitis. Brianna was so sick that she ended up having to miss school for almost a week, and during this time, Scarlett texted Eddie stating, "I hope those pills I gave her are slowly killing her, LOL." But Scarlett's murder plot failed, and pretty soon Brianna was back to feeling better and returned to school, much to the disappointment of Scarlett. And you have to think, too, she returned to school. She was probably, eager to see Scarlett. She was probably happy to see her. Finally, I can see my friend. Sorry I was out for a week, but I was really sick. The whole time, completely unaware that it was your best friend that poisoned you.
Yeah, also, while she was dying, there was no remorse. In fact, she was like, I hope this actually kills her.
I hope it kills her slowly.
So that's not like she thought about it after she done it and was like, oh, what have I done? This was like, man, I hope this works.
Although Scarlett told Eddie that she planned to try and poison Brianna again soon, Eddie told her he actually wouldn't mind trying out his new hunting knife he recently purchased on a family trip to Bulgaria. At this point, the two decided that they were going to stab Brianna to death and began making plans to do it. Originally, the two had planned to kill Brianna on January 27th, 2023, by lowering her into Colchester Park and stabbing her to death before covering her body with logs. But it should also be noted that the two had actually planned to kill another person before Brianna this day, a boy only referred to as Boy E in court filings. The plan was to first kill Boy E, but if that failed or they couldn't get to him, Brianna would be the next best option. Scarlett arranged to meet Brianna on January 28th at 1 p.m., under the guise of smoking marijuana at Colchester Park. Meanwhile, she was texting with Eddie to plan out how best to surprise attack Brianna and kill her. So I'm actually going to just read you guys the text between Scarlett and Eddie the day, just to give you guys an understanding of how sick in the head these two were. So I'm actually going to be Scarlett, and Brad here is going to be Eddie. And I should say the text start with Scarlett, then Eddie, then Scarlett, so on. If we can't get to Boy E tomorrow, we can kill Brianna.
Yeah, I want to see if it will scream like a boy or a girl.
She agreed to come to Colchester Park tomorrow.
So, should I bring my knife?
Yeah. Is it definitely sharp enough, by the way? Meet me at the wooden post in Lanier at 12. We'll go over the plan again, and I'll show you where I'm killing her, and then we can walk to the library to meet her. I have a chef's blade, so I want you to grab onto Brianna, slit her throat, and when she starts to fall, stab her in the back, then pass me the knife. I want to stab her at least once, even if she's dead, just 'cause it's fun, LOL.
Let's have 2 words, one for getting the knife ready and another to stab.
For get the knife ready, I'll look at you and cough, and for stab, I'll say gay. So, that was just to show you how callous and casual these two were talking about murdering an innocent girl that was her friend. It was her friend. And they're just like, yeah, you stab her, surprise her like this, slit her throat, and then I want to stab her at least once because I just think it'll be fun. So the two arrive at Colchester Park, and they begin to go over their plan to attack Brianna, even recording themselves on camera at the very site where they would murder her just weeks later. At around 11:30 on January 28th, Brianna texted Scarlett to let her know she would be unable to meet up, which of course infuriated her. Brianna said the two could hang out Monday, but Eddie told Scarlett that he had school that day and to tell Brianna they can hang out on Saturday. So it should also be noted at this point that Brianna had absolutely no idea who Eddie is. She never met him or interacted with him in any sort of capacity. Scarlett is also not mentioning Eddie whenever she makes these plans with Brianna. It's always under the guise that it's just going to be Scarlett and Brianna hanging out, never Eddie. So that makes it even kind of worse because Eddie is saying all this about someone he doesn't even know or has never met. And he's just so callous about it, too. He's just like, yeah, she should be good. Bring her here and we'll help her kill her. So over the next week, the two continue to talk about their plan of murdering Brianna on Saturday. So on February 3rd, Scarlett actually sent a photo to Eddie, which shows how she wrote out their murder plan in her diary. It lists the date of the murder, February 11th, the victim as Brianna Ghey, and describes how the two plan to lure her there and stab her to death. On February 10th, Scarlett again texted Brianna about hanging out in Colchester Park and getting high the next day, and Brianna agreed to meet her at a nearby library and walk to the park from there. The night before the murders, Scarlett texted Eddie stating, "The knife will definitely 100% kill her, right?" To which Eddie responded with, "Yes, it cuts the skin very easily." And Scarlett ended the conversation by saying, "I'm excited as fuck tomorrow, LOL." With that, we are back to the day where we started this case, Saturday, February 11th, the day of Brianna's murder. That day, Brianna left her home at about 1 p.m. to make the journey to Colchester Park to meet Scarlett. Like we mentioned earlier, Brianna suffered from severe anxiety, so for her to make this journey was a huge deal. She was actually texting back and forth with her mother the entire time, talking about how nervous she was to be traveling by herself, but her mother assured her that she could handle it. So that's even worse, is the fact that Brianna has such severe anxiety, she barely leaves the house, but she cares enough about Scarlett and wants to hang out with her so much that she's willing to put herself in this uncomfortable situation just to spend time with her friend.
Worse, she trusts Scarlett that much, because I have a friend that has that kind of anxiety, and he will barely leave the house only with people he really trusts.
So yes, and Brianna really trusted Scarlett because Scarlett was her closest friend. And so that, again, makes it so much worse because the whole time she's feeling nervous and really anxious about venturing out by herself. But at the same time, what's getting her through it is being like, pretty soon I'll be with my best friend and we'll be hanging out and chilling together and it's all going to be worth it.
And her poor mother has to be like, man, I talked her through being able to go and do this.
And Esther would later say that too. Like, of course she had no idea what was going to happen, but she was like, I was actually so happy and proud that day of Brianna because she was texting me and I was letting her know, like, it's good you're feeling this nervous, but you're overcoming it. And that's so awesome. And so Esther really was so happy for her daughter because she was like, she's thriving now. She has a friend. That friend's getting her out of the house. She's really coming out of her shell. And that just so heartbreaking to know, like, that day she's like, I'm so happy my daughter is finally, facing her fears and getting out of the house completely, all of them completely unaware that these two sickos are planning to brutally murder her. So Brianna got off a bus and met up with Scarlett at 1:53 p.m. And security footage from the bus shows Eddie standing off to the side in the background watching the two before finally joining them as they walked to the park. The trio arrived at the park at around 2:10 and walked through the woods to the spot where Brianna would be murdered near the park bench. Witnesses would later state that none of the trio were talking to each other and just kind of messing around on their phones as they walked.
I mean, it's got to be weird because the guy's not even supposed to be there.
It is, and of course we don't know fully what happened because we just see it on the security camera footage briefly. Maybe Scarlett was like, this is just my buddy, he's tagging along. I'm sure Brianna was just like, okay, whatever. You never mentioned him before, but I guess it's cool.
But again, when you have an anxiety disorder like that, any kind of change of things is going to make you more nervous and everything. So I would say she was probably afraid.
I'm sure. And again, she's probably just like, this is my best friend. I trust her. If this guy's her friend too, I guess he's cool. I'm stressed out, but I want to hang out with my friend, Scarlett. Once at the spot where the murder would occur, the three just kind of hung out, with Scarlett pretending to be waiting for her dealer to bring them cocaine. So, as part of their half-baked attempt at getting away with murder, Scarlett actually set up a fake Snapchat profile of a guy she named Nathan, who was supposed to be her drug dealer from Liverpool. The plan was for Scarlett and Eddie to pin the murder on him. As the three waited in the park, Scarlett would send messages back and forth to herself as Nathan, appearing to direct him to the location. Scarlett would send her last message to Nathan at around 3:03 p.m. asking him to hurry. Following this, Brianna would send 2 final messages. One was to a friend of hers stating, "Girl, Scarlett is so weird. I think she's pretending to have a dealer." Brianna would send her final message at 3:06 p.m. to Scarlett stating, "Girl, where are you?" This is believed to have been sent less than a minute before the attack. So by this point, Eddie and Scarlett had left Brianna sitting on the park bench while they went off down the nearby hiking trails, most likely in order to ensure that there was no nearby witnesses to what they were about to do. At about 3:08 p.m., Scarlett and Eddie returned to the park bench where Brianna was sitting, and without warning, Eddie pulled out his hunting knife and attacked Brianna, stabbing her 3 times in the back and head before handing the knife to Scarlett, who proceeded to stab Brianna another 25 times, all over her back, neck, chest, and head, as Brianna tried desperately to fight them off. Investigators believe the attack lasted anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. And I know that doesn't sound like a long time, but you have to think being attacked and stabbed all over your body repeatedly with a hunting knife for 5 minutes, unbearable. It was at this point, after stabbing Brianna 28 times, that Scarlett and Eddie were scared off by the couple walking their dog, who then called police. Following their murder of Brianna, Scarlett and Eddie went their separate ways and immediately returned to their respective homes to act like nothing had happened. So once news broke that a girl was found stabbed to death at the park, both actually sent messages back and forth, attempting to act shocked. However, within a few hours, Eddie began to express fear that they were going to get caught, and Scarlett assured him that they wouldn't. Again, trying to act shocked, like, you see where a girl was stabbed in the park earlier? Meanwhile, there are hundreds of messages of you plotting the murder.
Diaries of it.
A diary that literally says the date, the victim, Brianna Ghey, and lays out how you plan to stab her to death. However, like we said at the start of the episode, police put on a search for 2 teenagers last seen with Brianna, and Scarlett's mom actually saw it on the news and confronted Scarlett, asking her if she had been with Brianna. Scarlett confirmed that she had been, but then left after Brianna ditched her to leave with a drug dealer named Nathan. Scarlett's mom called authorities to notify them of Scarlett's story, and this immediately put Scarlett on edge. Now feeling nervous, Scarlett began attempting to make herself look more innocent by sending a message to Brianna's phone which read, "Girl, is everything okay? Some girl got killed in the Lanier Park. Why did you ditch us for some random man from Manchester? Like, the fuck? This is so fucked up." She then started posting on a memorial page that had been set up for Brianna, posting a photo of her with the caption, "Brianna was one of the best people I'd ever met and such an amazing friend. It's so fucked up and sickening what got done to her." Again, just shows you how horrible Scarlett is as a person. She posted this photo of Brianna and talked about how such an amazing friend she is and how wonderful she was. All the while, she is the one that brutally killed her.
I mean, honestly, too, to even say the F word on a memorial post, that seems like you're a little out of touch with things.
Yeah, kind of really weird. But that is her attempt at appearing innocent. But all this would prove to be pointless, as police quickly gathered Scarlett and Eddie were the last people to be seen with Brianna, and on top of that, they had multiple security cameras and footage showing the two leading Brianna into the park and then leaving without her. On February 12th, just 24 hours after Brianna's murder, Scarlett and Eddie were arrested at their homes on charges of first-degree murder. Both were brought in for questioning, and even now, Scarlett continued to play innocent, telling investigators that she had been at the park with Brianna, but that a man named Nathan showed up and Brianna left with him. Anytime she was confronted with a question she couldn't or didn't want to answer, she would simply reply, "No comment." But now, while Scarlett was playing dumb, Eddie was a different story, and he began to sing like a canary to investigators, telling them that Scarlett had been the sole attacker of Brianna, and that he had stepped away to use the restroom, and when he returned, he found Scarlett stabbing her. When investigators questioned him on why he brought a hunting knife with him to the park, Eddie denied that he ever did and said that he could never kill anyone because, quote, "It goes against everything I stand for." Either they were too stupid or just delusional, but all of this was easily able to be fact-checked considering police got search warrants for their houses and phones. They found the hundreds of text messages between the two planning not just Brianna's murder, but the murders of several other teenagers. They found Scarlett's journal with her plan to kill Brianna on February 11th, and they discovered the hunting knife hidden in Eddie's room, which still had Brianna's dried blood on it. So yeah, these two geniuses really did a good job covering their tracks.
I'm glad they didn't cover their tracks because other people would have gotten murdered.
That's the thing, too. I love all these serial killers that think they're so methodical in planning their murders, and then it's like, no, you're just an idiot.
I just hate that some innocent person that seemed to be like a really good person had to be a victim to these idiots.
And that's the thing that sucks the most is these two Nimrods took such a smart and wonderful life just for the hell of it. There's no rhyme or reason for it. With all this info, police officially charged Scarlett and Eddie with first-degree murder on February 15th. Although initially their names were withheld from the public due to the fact that they were underage, investigators announced that they were still investigating whether or not Brianna's murder was a hate crime before also charging the two with it. So during the pretrial hearings, Scarlett changed her story and dropped the one about the mysterious man named Nathan being Brianna's killer. Now she states it was actually her who stepped away for a moment, and when she came back, she found Eddie attacking Brianna before he threatened her to keep her quiet. Both Eddie and Scarlett accused the other of being Brianna's sole attacker, but it was fairly easy for prosecutors to discover that both had been willing participants. Both were fully aware of what was happening. So it's so funny, too, because both are like, no, they did it. No, they did it. And it's like, well, can I show you the text messages you two sent literally less than 24 hours before the murder, where both of you discussed how you were going to take
Or
turns?
where you planned it for weeks before.
Or the security cam footage that shows both of you, like, kind of stalking her. While awaiting their trial, both Eddie and Scarlett were examined by psychologists and doctors. Scarlett was found to be autistic, and Eddie had a form of selective mutism, which made him unable to speak to anyone but his mother. Scarlett admitted that she had fantasies of murdering people, and that she had actually become obsessed with Brianna due to how pretty she was. She would go on to state that the reason she wanted to kill Brianna so badly was because she felt like Brianna was trying to distance herself from her and wanted to stop being friends with her. So Scarlett decided to kill her so, quote, she could never leave me. The trial officially began on November 27th, 2023, with both Scarlett and Eddie entering pleas of not guilty. Eddie's defense accused Scarlett of manipulation and gaslighting Eddie to be her accomplice, and since he was diagnosed with autism, it made him more susceptible to her lies. Scarlett's defense, on the other hand, argued that although Scarlett did indeed send all those texts laying out a plan to murder Brianna, it was all a part of one of her sick fantasies, and she never actually intended to hurt Brianna. That was all Eddie. Eddie's transphobic texts were also brought up and used by Scarlett's defense to show that Eddie hated Brianna because she was trans, and that's why he killed her. The trial actually concluded on December 20th, 2023, with the jury deliberating for 5 hours before returning with a verdict for both teens. They were found guilty on all charges.
Thank goodness.
On February 2nd, 2024, during their sentencing hearing, a judge actually ordered that the names of both teens be unsealed, because remember, up to this point they were only known as Boy and Girl Y. During all this, due to their age, the judge stated, the public had a strong interest in unrestricted reporting of what is obviously an exceptional case. Both Scarlett and Eddie were sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 22 years to be served before they are eligible for parole. I don't think they're allowed to actually give life in prison without the possibility of parole due to how young they are. So since they were still under the age of 18, at least here in the United States, I don't know how it works in the UK, but it is deemed cruel and unusual not to give people that commit serious crimes before the age of 18 the possibility of parole. So I'm assuming that's what happened. The earliest either can apply for parole is 2044, although it is unlikely either will ever be released. Following the unsealing of Scarlett and Eddie's name to the public, reports began to come to light about the dark history of Eddie Ratcliffe's home life. Turns out that Eddie's father, Kyle Ratcliffe, was a convicted sex offender and pedophile. Kyle was actually arrested and jailed back in 2008 for exposing himself to underage girls at a park. And in February of 2024, he was again arrested for masturbating at a bus stop in front of two 15-year-old girls. So we don't know the full extent of what went on behind closed doors at the Ratcliffe home, but this is a pretty clear indication that something wasn't right. Brianna Ghey was laid to rest on March 15th, 2023, with her funeral being attended by hundreds of mourners come to pay their respects. A GoFundMe was set up by Brianna's friends to help pay for the funeral cost, and it actually raised over $70,000 in just 3 days. All the money that wasn't used by Brianna's funeral was donated to a local children's mental health therapy program by her mother, Esther Ghey. In September of 2023, Esther Ghey launched her own campaign across the UK in order to teach and raise mindfulness, tolerance, and understanding in UK schools. She raised over $80,000 for the campaign, and in 2024 joined a national coalition to demand mindfulness be taught in schools all across England. She continues to speak out and give speeches at various political events across the UK, making sure Brianna is never forgotten and to remind people the importance of tolerance and compassion to trans youth. She, along with many other supporters, also condemned the way British media reported on Brianna's murder in the weeks following her death. Many news outlets referred to Brianna as a boy and used her dead name instead of Brianna, and that was a whole nother thing they had to deal with, is just how disrespectful media coverage was of Brianna. Like, there were reports, they listed her as Brianna, but when they found out she was trans, they dug up her dead name and then listed her dead name and that she was a boy. And so it's just completely disrespectful. A memorial was held on the 1-year anniversary of Brianna's murder, in which over 1,000 people attended. And finally, in March of 2024, Esther actually met with Scarlett's mother, Emma. Esther would state that she commended Emma's bravery throughout all this, saying, "Both of us are mothers trying to navigate something that nobody should have to go through." And that is the tragic and senseless murder of Brianna Ghey. And also just want to give it up for Esther Ghey, the fact that she was such a strong woman, all the things she's done since Brianna's murder to raise awareness for tolerance, understanding, and teaching in schools, but also the fact that she met with her daughter's killer, the person that spent months planning her daughter's murder brutally, and she was still able to understand, like, I know this isn't your fault, like, you're in pain too, like, you lost a child too, to this, we're both just trying to make the best of we can out of this situation. So she's, snaps to Esther. What an amazing mother. Yeah, this is probably the most recent case we've covered, and again, like I said, it just came to light in February 2024. That's when we discovered the names of the perpetrators of Brianna Ghey's murder. And it's such a sad story, such a senseless story. And it's one of those stories I think is the most terrifying because, again, it wasn't for money or sex or anything like that. It was for two very mentally ill teenagers who just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. And I think that's the most terrifying for me because kind of hard to predict it. Like, your best friend to your face is like loving you, and then behind your back is texting someone being like, I poisoned them. Hopefully it slowly kills them.
Yeah, this one's extremely sad because, your friends you're supposed to cherish. And then, like, that's one of the ultimate betrayals right there, is when your friend is not your friend and literally kills you. It's just such a waste of life. Brianna seemed like she really would have been like a shining beacon out there. And it's always sucks when the world loses somebody like that, especially to something so senseless like this. It's such a waste.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, why? It's so senseless. No rhyme or reason for it. It's just one of those horrible situations where it's like, even so hard to wrap your head around and comprehend. Like, of course, Brianna was such a lot in her community, really was doing really good things at such a young age. There's no telling what she would have done if she got the chance to live her life. And the fact that her life was so brutally and senselessly taken from her by two people that their only motive was they wanted to do it because they thought it was fun. But thankfully, both are in jail. Both will probably never get out of jail. And with that, thank you guys again so much for tuning in for another episode. Please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify if you enjoyed the podcast. Helps us out a lot, helps other people discover the podcast. And of course, we just love hearing from you guys. If you want to see photos from this case, you can follow us on Instagram at beerswithqueerspod or on Facebook at beerswithqueers, a true crime podcast. And until Monday, stay dangerous out there, my friend.
See you guys soon.
Bye.